Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive topic. We're going to trace the rapid, escalating domino effect that led up to the absolute most devastating conflict in human history. We usually look back at World War II and picture crumbling cities, huge geopolitical shifts, and legendary battles. But to really wrap our heads around it, we have to look at exactly how it began.
Let's just skip the boring bureaucratic setup and jump right into the mystery of it all. You see, World War II didn't just spontaneously erupt out of nowhere in September of 1939. As the famous saying goes, it's really difficult to track down one single event that sparked it. Actually, it was the inevitable, tragic result of a 20-year chain reaction of deep resentments, total economic ruin, and unchecked aggression.
Section 1. The Price of Defeat.
All right, let's rewind a bit to 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. After the First World War, the victorious nations drafted a peace treaty that contained the highly controversial Article 231. This was known as the War Guilt Clause, and it basically forced Germany to accept absolute 100% blame for the conflict. And to pay for it? Well, they was slapped with a staggering $33 billion fine. To put that into perspective, in today's money, that's equivalent to roughly $270 billion. France and Britain wanted to completely recover their own wartime losses, and they put it all on the backs of the German public. We're talking about a debt so unbelievably massive that Germany literally wasn't able to make its final payment on this fine until the year 2010. It took nearly a century.
And, as you'd probably expect, the immediate result was devastating hyperinflation. When Germany tried to start paying this off in 1921, their currency, the German mark, devalued at a rate that is, frankly, hard to even comprehend. Just think about this comparison for a second. A single loaf of bread in Berlin went from 160 marks in 1922 to 200 billion marks in 1923. It totally crippled the German economy. People were literally starving in the streets, unemployment skyrocketed, and the entire nation was left utterly humiliated and desperate.
Section 2. Hitler's Rise to Power.
So when people are starving and feeling internationally disgraced, they look for a savior, and they usually look for a scapegoat too. Following a failed 1923 coup that, ironically enough, actually boosted his popularity by making him a national figure, a young political leader named Adolf Hitler spent years spreading propaganda. He falsely blamed Jewish people and socialists for Germany's disgrace. Then, the Great Depression hit in 1929, leaving 6 million Germans unemployed by 1933. Exploiting this absolute misery, Hitler seized total control, declaring himself dictator with a terrifying vision to pursue a, quote-unquote, racially pure German empire.
Now, what's really wild here is how Hitler began openly violating the Treaty of Versailles' strict military ban. But instead of stopping him, the world hesitated. In 1935, when Germany revealed they had a secret air force, Britain offered appeasement. They signed a naval agreement that formally recognized his right to a navy, mostly because many felt the original treaty had just been too harsh. Meanwhile, a panicked France decided to just build a giant, 450-kilometer wall on their border, known as the Maginot Line, hoping that would somehow keep them safe.
Section 3. The Era of Appeasement.
Hitler was aggressively seeking what he called Lebensraum, which translates to living space, for his newly radicalized empire. He wanted to unite all German-speaking countries and grab their resources, starting right next door with Austria. And he accomplished this takeover completely seamlessly. Hitler basically bullied the Austrian chancellor into appointing Nazis, like Dr. Hans Fischbach, directly into the government. These newly appointed officials then immediately freed imprisoned Nazis. When the Austrian chancellor tried to hold a public vote to remain independent, Hitler marched his army right into Vienna, spreading totally fake propaganda about communist riots to justify a military occupation before the public could even cast a ballot. Austria was annexed without a single drop of blood.
Emboldened by this, Hitler then looked to the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, claiming it belonged to Germany just because 3 million Germans lived there. Enter British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. To avoid war at literally all costs, Britain and France signed the 1938 Munich Agreement. As Chamberlain's quote suggests, they actually believed that by handing Hitler this region of Czechoslovakia, he would finally be satisfied, and Europe would find lasting peace.
Well, spoiler alert, that appeasement strategy was a total failure. Hitler broke his promise in less than a year. By March 1939, he invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, just splitting it right in two. Then, he signed a sly, shocking non-aggression pact with his ideological enemy, the Soviet Union, just so they could mutually carve up his next target. In September 1939, 1 million German troops attacked Poland from multiple directions. The line had finally been crossed.
Section 4. Lightning War and Blitzkrieg.
When the UK and France finally declared war on Germany, the reality on the ground was just a nightmare. Poland, fighting a defensive war with an army that still heavily relied on horses, was annihilated in under a week. Britain and France couldn't even mobilize fast enough to save them. The reason for this total devastation was Hitler's revolutionary warfare strategy, the Blitzkrieg. Literally translating to lightning war, he designed this to wrap up invasions in a matter of days, completely paralyzing opponents before they even had time to formulate a defense, let alone call for help.
But here's the truly crazy part. The secret weapon that made this impossible speed a reality wasn't just the rapid tanks or the Luftwaffe attacking from the sky. The German troops were heavily drugged with Pervitin, which today we know as crystal meth. Yes, you heard that right. This allowed soldiers to fight continuously, day and night, suppressing hunger, thirst, and the need for sleep. They literally overran their enemies simply by never stopping to rest.
After Poland fell, Europe entered what was called the Phony War. Britain and France had declared war, sure, but they kind of just sat back, providing zero actual military support. Meanwhile, the dictators kept right on moving. The Soviets struggled in a bitter 2-month winter war against Finland, eventually taking about 11% of their land. And Hitler? He easily swallowed up Denmark and Norway using that exact same Blitzkrieg strategy, installing puppet governments while the Allies simply watched.
Section 5. The Fall of Europe.
This all came to a boiling point on May 10, 1940. Facing massive criticism for his total failure to protect Europe, Neville Chamberlain resigned, and Winston Churchill took over as Prime Minister of the UK on the exact same day that Hitler unleashed an all-out, brilliant military deception that completely broke the Allies. Remember that giant wall France built, the Maginot Line? Well, Germany sent Group C to attack it just as a distraction. Group B attacked the Netherlands to draw the British and French forces north. But the real threat? That was Group A. 40,000 German military vehicles snuck right through the Ardennes forest, a dense, wooded region the French military experts wrongly assumed was totally impenetrable by tanks. They slipped right behind the Allied forces.
Because of this masterful trap, 400,000, let that sink in, 400,000 Allied troops suddenly found themselves utterly surrounded on 3 sides by the rushing Nazi army. They were pushed all the way back to the beaches of a French port town called Dunkirk, with the vast open sea as their only possible escape route.
If these troops were killed, Britain and France would have essentially lost their entire armies, period. In a desperate bid for survival, Winston Churchill launched Operation Dynamo. It became the biggest evacuation in military history. The British Royal Air Force fought furiously in the skies to protect the troops, while ordinary everyday civilians sailed their private fishing boats across the English Channel to help rescue these men. Miraculously, 350,000 soldiers were saved from absolute slaughter, though they did have to abandon almost all of their crucial military equipment right there on the sand.
Without their army and their gear, the mainland fell. By late June 1940, just weeks later, France formally surrendered to Hitler. Mussolini over in Italy sensed the shifting winds and officially joined forces with Germany, forming the Axis powers via the Pact of Steel. Meanwhile, looking across the Atlantic, the United States maintained its strict isolationist stance, absolutely refusing to interfere in Europe's mess.
The dominoes had completely fallen. Almost every neighboring nation was now under Nazi control or influence. The chain reaction that started with a harsh treaty in 1919 had resulted in Great Britain standing entirely alone against an unstoppable, methed-up war machine. As Churchill declared in his legendary speech, they were prepared to fight on the beaches and in the streets, but make no mistake about it, they were completely isolated.
So with Hitler holding a massive upper hand and seemingly no one left to challenge him in Western Europe, how on earth did the situation take a U-turn? How did an isolated, battered Britain manage to survive, fight back, and eventually pave the way for the total defeat of Nazi Germany? That is the ultimate cliffhanger we're left with today, and it's exactly what we'll uncover in Part 2 of this Explainer series. Until then, keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next Explainer.